Spencer Crane, a desperate veteran, was just looking for a roof over his niece's and his dog's head. But the Mariner's Rest Hotel was no ordinary sanctuary. It held a secret. With him, Tank, a retired canine, should have been at ease. Instead, the dog grew tense. Ignoring the cold and the debris, Tank became obsessed with a solid plaster wall in the library. He whined, his claws scratching lightly, an urgent sound in the dead of night. Spencer thought it was rats, but he knew better. Tank was trained to detect things that humans could not. He didn't smell rats. He smelled something that had been sealed in the dark for 40 years. We invite you to support our channel by subscribing, so you don't miss what they are about to uncover. The windshield wipers beat a slow, rhythmic protest against the Oregon mist. Each sweep revealed the same view: gray sky, gray sea, and gray asphalt slick with rain. The old pickup truck's engine sputtered, a sound that made Spencer Crane's grip tighten on the steering wheel. He was a tall man, still in his 30s, but worn at the edges by things he refused to name. His frame was slightly thin but solid, the kind of wiry strength that lasts. His brown hair, damp from the leaking door seal, was a little too long and showed the first strands of silver at his temples. A scruffy, untrimmed beard covered a face that was naturally kind but currently set in lines of deep exhaustion. He wore an old brown leather jacket left unzipped, revealing a plaid flannel shirt in shades of red, navy, and white over a simple gray t-shirt. His faded blue jeans were tucked into sturdy, mud-caked work boots. In the passenger seat, buried in a nest of blankets, slept Sabrina, his 4-year-old niece. She was the only reason he was still driving. Her breathing was a soft, steady rhythm in the struggling cab. A tangle of blonde hair had escaped her hood, and the high collar of her bright red dress peeked out from the blankets, a tiny flag of color in a world of damp gray. From the extended cab behind the seats came a low, anxious whine, followed by the heavy thump of a tail against the upholstery. "Easy, boy," Spencer murmured, his voice rough. He glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting the intelligent, worried eyes of Tank. His retired K9 partner, a German Shepherd of 9 years, was his anchor. Tank's thick coat, once a standard black and tan, was now a distinguished, grizzled mix of gray and white, especially around his muzzle. He was watchful, his gaze missing nothing, his body tense with the same unease that filled the truck. Spencer's eyes dropped to the dashboard. 2 lights glowed with malicious intent: the check engine icon, which had been on for 600 miles, and the low fuel light, which had illuminated 20 miles back. This was it, the end of the line. He'd lost the apartment in Portland after losing the construction job. The noise, the sudden clang of dropped rebar, the shouting of the foreman, it had all combined, sending him straight back to the dust and heat of the Al Anbar province. He'd found himself on his knees by a pallet of cement bags, hands over his head, the world reduced to a high-pitched ringing in his ears. They had let him go gently, calling it a layoff, but he knew the truth. The lawyer's call had come 3 days later, a lifeline he hadn't known existed. His great-uncle, Thomas Crane, had passed away. Spencer hadn't seen the man since he was a child, and only then as a frightening, bearded figure looming in the doorway of a house that smelled of old books and salt. "Mr. Crane," the lawyer had said, his voice dry as paper, "you and your niece are the sole beneficiaries of his estate, specifically the Mariner's Rest Hotel in Oak Haven Point." The lawyer had paused, a slight cough betraying his discomfort. "I must advise you, the property is not in operational condition. It has been condemned for almost 2 decades. The only other asset, a bank account, was drained to cover back taxes. The hotel is all that's left." All that's left. The words echoed in the cab, mingling with the sputtering engine. Spencer had sold his tools for gas money, and what few groceries were packed in a cooler behind Tank. This wasn't a new beginning. This was their last stop. The truck crested a final hill, and the town of Oak Haven Point appeared below them. It was less a town and more a scattering of small, tired buildings huddled against the relentless Pacific. The main street was quiet, the neon sign of a tavern buzzing weakly in the late afternoon gloom. He followed the lawyer's directions, turning onto a narrow road that wound up the cliffside. The asphalt turned to gravel, the gravel to a rutted, muddy track. Then the hotel appeared. Sabrina stirred, woken by the truck's lurching halt. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, the bright red of her dress startlingly vivid. "Are we there, Uncle Spence?" she whispered, her voice still thick with sleep. Spencer couldn't answer. He just stared. It wasn't a hotel. It was a carcass. The Mariner's Rest loomed against the bruised purple sky like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. It was 5 stories of sagging roofs, splintered timber, and dark, empty windows that looked like vacant eye sockets. Most of the porches had collapsed, and the wind, whistling through the shattered structure, made a sound like a low, mournful howl. It clung to the very edge of the cliff, a monument to decay. Spencer's heart, already heavy, sank into his stomach. This wasn't a refuge. It was a grave. "Wow," Sabrina breathed, her face pressed to the glass. "It's a giant's house." A low growl rumbled deep in Tank's chest. "I know, boy," Spencer said, forcing his hands to release the wheel. "I see it." As he opened the door, the sharp smell of salt, wet rot, and cold rock filled his lungs. A faded green truck, older even than his own, was parked near the chained-off driveway. An older man stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He wore a thick flannel jacket and a worn baseball cap, his face etched with the deep lines of someone who had spent a lifetime squinting at the sea. This was Tyler Whitman, though Spencer didn't know his name yet. He owned the general store in town. "You must be the Crane boy," the man called out, his voice gravelly. He didn't walk closer. "Spencer Crane," Spencer confirmed, stepping out onto the muddy ground. Tank hopped out after him, staying close to Spencer's leg, his gaze fixed on the old man. Tyler Whitman nodded, his eyes moving from Spencer to the little girl in the red dress peering from the window, then to the dilapidated hotel. He winced. "Lawyer called my store, asked if I'd check on the property when you arrived. Figured I'd save you the trouble. There's nothing to check." "It's all we have," Spencer said simply. Tyler looked at him for a long moment, his expression softening from suspicion to something like pity. "Son, you don't understand. That building ain't just rundown. It's dangerous. The cliff's unstable, the foundation is cracked, and the roof's a sieve. It's not fit for a dog, let alone a little girl." "We'll patch it up," Spencer said, his jaw setting. "The manager's office looks separate. Maybe we can start there." "That's not what I mean," Tyler said, lowering his voice, though there was no one to hear. "It's not just the rot. You know about Thomas's curse, son?" Spencer sighed. "Mr. Whitman, I don't believe in curses." "Neither do I," Tyler grunted. "This ain't supernatural. Thomas wasn't haunted. He was just mean. And paranoid. Lived in that place for 40 years after they shut it down, boarded up the windows, and chased everyone off." He jested with his chin toward the boarded-up main entrance. "Heard he set traps, simple things, boards with nails, maybe some bear traps in the woods out back, to keep kids out. He kept a shotgun handy for visitors. He believed people were trying to steal from him. That's the curse, the mess a bitter, paranoid old man left behind. That building is full of his anger. It's no place for you." Spencer looked at the dying truck, the gauge sitting squarely on empty. He looked at Sabrina's small face, full of innocent curiosity. He looked at Tank, who stood beside him, ready for whatever came next. They had no gas. They had no money. They had nowhere else to go. "Thank you for the warning, sir," Spencer said, turning toward the building. "But we're staying." Tyler Whitman watched him, shook his head slowly, and climbed back into his green truck. "Don't say I didn't warn you, son." The engine turned over, and the truck rumbled away, leaving them alone. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the cliff into a cold, deep shadow. The wind picked up, and the skeleton of the Mariner's Rest moaned its greeting. Spencer pulled Sabrina's hood up over her head, lifted her into his arms, and grabbed his duffel bag. "Okay, Tank, he said quietly to the dog. "Let's go find our new home." The manager's office was a small, detached structure connected to the main lobby by a covered, collapsed walkway. It was its separation that had saved it. While the main hotel groaned under the weight of its own decay, the small office stood relatively firm, its roofline sagging but mostly intact. It was one room with a pot-bellied stove in the corner, a rotted desk, and a floor covered in a thick carpet of dried leaves and rodent droppings. But it was shelter. It was defensible. They spent the first 3 days in a flurry of desperate activity. Spencer used the last of the truck's gas to power a small generator he'd found in the shed, giving them a single bare work light and enough power to charge his phone, though he had no signal. He scavenged unbroken boards from the collapsed porches, his hammer echoing in the damp air. Each strike was a small victory against the chaos. He boarded up the 2 broken windows in the office, leaving only the sturdiest one, which faced away from the sea. He swept the floor, his breath fogging in the cold, and managed to patch the worst of the roof leak with a sheet of rusted tin. Tank never left his side, a silent gray and white shadow. The dog watched the tree line with a low-level intensity, as if expecting a threat to emerge from the dripping forest. The work was a bomb for Spencer. It was a mission. Clear, defined objectives. Secure the perimeter. Establish a base. Protect the assets. The assets were a 4-year-old girl in a bright red dress and a 9-year-old dog with a veteran's eyes. But the work only held the darkness at bay during the day. The nights were another matter. On the 4th night, the wind hit the cliff with the force of a physical blow. Spencer, sleeping lightly on a cot he'd found, was instantly awake. But he wasn't in Oregon. He was in the Humvee, the air thick with dust and the smell of diesel. The high-pitched whine of the wind became the scream of the engine. A loose shutter slamming somewhere in the hotel's upper floors became the sharp, percussive sound of incoming fire. He gasped, rolling off the cot, his hands reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. "Contact!" he choked out, his voice a dry rasp. "Contact, right side." A heavy weight pressed against his chest. A wet nose nudged his face. A low, concerned whine cut through the panic. Spencer blinked. The smell of dust and diesel faded, replaced by the scent of old wood, dog fur, and the faint, sweet smell of his sleeping niece. He was on the floor of the manager's office. Tank had straddled him, his big paws planted firmly on the floor on either side of Spencer's torso, his heavy head resting on his chest. The dog stared down at him, his dark, intelligent eyes filled with a familiar, grounding concern. Spencer's breathing hitched. He reached up, his hand shaking, and tangled his fingers in the thick fur of Tank's ruff. "I'm okay, boy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm okay. Stand down." Tank didn't move until Spencer's breathing evened out. Then the dog let out a quiet huff and lay down beside the cot, his body a warm, solid barrier against the night. The only part of the room that seemed immune to the gloom was the corner where Sabrina had set up her small world. She was a beacon of light in her red dress, which she refused to take off, insisting it was her lucky house dress. She had found a small 3-legged plastic stool and a collection of smooth gray stones from the path. She spent hours in quiet conversation, her small voice a murmur against the backdrop of the wind. Spencer, sipping bitter instant coffee from a thermos, watched her. She was talking to the stones, arranging them in a careful line on the floor. "No, you can't go there," she instructed the largest stone. "It's too cold. The wind will get you." Spencer smiled, the first real smile in days. "Who are you talking to, Sweet Pea?" he asked. Sabrina looked up, her blonde hair falling in her eyes. "My friends," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Oh, yeah? Do these friends have names?" "Yes," she said, pointing to the stones. "This is Mr. Pebbles, this is Jumpy, and this is Sarah." She then pointed to an empty spot in the dusty corner. "And that's Uncle Thomas." Spencer's smile faltered. "What's that, honey?" "Bearded Uncle Thomas," she clarified, her voice serious. He's sad. He says his house is too noisy. Spencer's blood ran cold for a moment. He looked at the empty corner, then back at his niece. He'd barely mentioned their great-uncle, and certainly not his appearance. He chalked it up to the lawyer's phone call. She must have overheard the name and, with a child's strange and wonderful logic, attached it to the giant groaning house. "Well," Spencer said, his voice a little tighter than before. "You tell bearded Uncle Thomas that I'm trying to quiet it down." On the 5th day, Spencer decided to explore the upper floors. He needed more boards, and he felt a soldier's need to map his new territory. He left Sabrina in the office, the door barricaded shut from the inside, with the generator running, and a promise to be back in 20 minutes. "You stay with her, Tank," Spencer ordered. Tank looked at the door, then at Spencer, and let out a whine. "That's an order, Tank. Guard, stay." The dog laid his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on the door, but he did not move. Spencer grabbed a crowbar and a flashlight. The main hotel was a maze of collapsed furniture and peeling wallpaper. The upper floors were worse. The wind had torn a hole in the roof, and the top floor was a damp, rotting mess. He found the library. It was at the far end of the 5th-floor hallway, its double doors warped and hanging off their hinges. He pushed one open, the sound a terrible screech of rusted metal. The room was vast, lined with shelves that reached the ceiling. Thousands of books, now swollen and ruined by the rain, lay scattered on the floor like rotting bricks. A huge, heavy oak bookshelf, at least 12 feet wide, stood against the far wall. Spencer was about to leave when he realized he was no longer alone. Tank stood beside him, panting lightly, his paws damp. "Tank? I told you to stay," Spencer said, his voice sharp. He felt a flash of anger, a rare break in the dog's discipline. But Tank wasn't looking at him. His body was rigid, his ears pricked forward. He ignored the scuttling sound of a rat in the corner. His gaze was locked on the massive bookshelf against the far wall. He moved forward, his nails clicking softly on the warped floorboards. He stopped about 3 feet from the shelf and stood perfectly still. Then he began to whine. It was not his anxious, "the truck is low on fuel" whine. It was a high, keening sound that Spencer had only heard once before during a training exercise for human remains detection. "What is it, boy?" Spencer said, his flashlight beam playing over the wall. "Just rats. It's just rats in the wall." Tank ignored him. He moved closer, pushing his nose against the dusty plaster behind the bookshelf. He snorted, then began to scratch, not a frantic digging, but a persistent, focused scrape at the base of the wall. "Tank, no, heel." The dog did not respond. His obsession was total. Spencer grabbed his collar and tried to pull him back. Tank resisted, his muscles locked. Spencer, the trained handler, took over. He put his own annoyance aside and observed. This was not prey drive. This was not fear. This was work. "Find?" Spencer asked, using the old command word. Tank whined again, a confirmation, and scratched once more at the plaster. Spencer got down on his knees. He put his nose near the wall, smelling nothing but mold, rat droppings, and the decay of 1,000 wet books. He pushed his ear against the plaster, hearing only the wind, but he knew his dog. Tank was a canine, trained to detect specific chemical compounds, and the one he was trained most rigorously on was the scent of decomposition. Spencer's first thought was chilling. Had his paranoid uncle trapped someone in here? He shook the thought away. No, Tyler Whitman had said Thomas was a recluse, not a monster. It had to be an animal, a raccoon, maybe a deer, that had found a way in and gotten trapped decades ago. The smell, sealed by the plaster, was only now, after years of decay, faint enough for a canine's trained nose to find. "Okay, boy," Spencer said, pulling Tank back firmly. "I get it. You found something. We'll deal with it later." He tugged Tank out of the library, the dog's claws scraping reluctantly on the floor. As Spencer pulled the warped door shut, he looked back at the massive bookshelf. It was an unsettling discovery, another layer of rot in a house that was already full of it. But for now, he had a window to fix. The dead, whatever they were, could wait. For 2 days, Spencer tried to ignore the library. He tried to ignore the dog. He failed on both counts. He threw himself into repairing the manager's office, focusing on small, achievable tasks. He rehung the door, using hinges he'd salvaged from a kitchen cabinet. He spent hours reinforcing the window frame he had patched, making it airtight. He told himself these actions were vital. He was securing their position. But he knew, in the quiet, honest part of his mind, that he was just hiding. Tank made the denial impossible. The dog had become a shadow of anxiety. He would not settle. He paced the small office, his claws making a soft, repetitive click-clack on the wooden floor. He would stand at the door, whine softly, and look back at Spencer, his intelligent eyes filled with a desperate, unasked question. "It's rats, Tank," Spencer said aloud on the second day, more to convince himself than the dog. "We've got our own problems. I'm not chasing rats for a ghost." Tank just lowered his head and let out a long, frustrated huff through his nose. He knew Spencer was wrong, and Spencer knew he knew. This was the animal Spencer had trusted with his life. In the dust of Kandahar, Tank's nose had been his shield, distinguishing the scent of disturbed earth from natural ground, the chemical signature of explosives from the smell of garbage. When Tank gave an alert, it was not a suggestion. It was data. It was life or death. And Tank was alerting. Spencer tried to push the knowledge away. He looked at Sabrina, humming to herself as she served a tea of cold water to her stone friends. She was safe, for now. She was warm, mostly. They had food for another week if they rationed. That was all that mattered. He did not have the energy to confront a dead raccoon plastered into a wall. He prayed it was just a raccoon. The thought that had been festering in the back of his mind, born from Tyler Whitman's warning, was one he couldn't bear. What if it wasn't an animal? What if his paranoid, angry great-uncle had done something monstrous? The denial held until the evening of the 7th day. That was when the storm truly arrived. It came not as a gentle rain, but as a full-scale assault. The wind, which had been a constant moan, rose in pitch to a shrieking, tearing howl. It felt as if the ocean itself was trying to claw the hotel from its cliffside perch. A massive gust hit the small office, and the entire structure shuddered. The new pane of glass in the window rattled violently in its frame. Sabrina, startled, ran to Spencer and wrapped her arms around his leg, burying her face in his jeans. "It's okay, sweet pea," Spencer said, stroking her hair. "The house is just stretching. It's an old house." But his voice was tight. Through the wall, he could hear the main hotel groaning under the strain, the terrible sound of splintering wood and objects crashing on the upper floors. That was when Tank's behavior changed. His low, anxious whine vanished. It was replaced by an urgent, sharp bark that echoed in the small room. He ran to the door, scratched at it, and barked again, looking back at Spencer with an intensity that bordered on frantic. "Uncle Spence, Tank is scared," Sabrina whispered. "No, honey," Spencer said, his heart suddenly cold. "He's not scared. He's working." The dog was no longer asking. He was demanding. The storm, the change in air pressure, the vibrations, something had shifted the scent, made it stronger. Spencer looked at the dog, then at the terrified child clinging to his leg. He could not live in this place, could not let Sabrina sleep one more night with that question mark hanging over them. He could not ignore a direct alert from his partner. "Okay," he said, his voice resolute. He picked Sabrina up and sat her on the cot, wrapping her in his own sleeping bag. "I have to go do some work, sweet pea. You stay right here. Don't move. You understand?" Sabrina nodded, her eyes wide. "Tank," Spencer said, his voice dropping into the familiar professional tone of a handler. "With me? Fine." The dog shot out the door as soon as Spencer opened it, not waiting, and vanished into the dark, howling chaos of the main hotel. Spencer grabbed his heavy flashlight and the crowbar. He ran, following the sound of Tank's claws on the stairs, his boots splashing in the puddles that were already forming in the lobby. He found Tank in the 5th-floor library. The dog was already at the massive oak bookshelf, digging frantically at the floorboards, pulling up chunks of rotted wood, trying to get to the wall behind it. "Easy, boy," Spencer shouted over the roar of the wind. "Easy, I have it." He shone the flashlight on the shelf. It was a monster, 12 feet wide and taller than he was, built of solid oak. It was filled with hundreds of rotting, waterlogged books, adding thousands of pounds to its weight. He tried to push it. It was like trying to push the cliff itself. "Okay," he grunted, bracing himself. He began the grueling work of pulling the books off the shelves, one armload at a time, throwing the pulpy, disintegrating masses onto the floor. They hit with a series of wet, heavy thuds. It took him 20 minutes. He was sweating, his brown leather jacket long since discarded, his plaid shirt soaked through. He jammed the crowbar between the back of the shelf and the wall and pulled. The wood screamed. The shelf didn't move. "Come on," he roared, putting his entire body weight into it. He felt a muscle in his back twinge in protest. The shelf scraped. It moved 1 inch. Tank barked, a high-pitched sound of encouragement. Spencer repositioned the crowbar and pulled again. A long, agonizing shriek of wood against wood filled the room. The shelf slid, scraping a permanent scar into the floor. He did it again and again, fighting it 1 painful inch at a time until he had moved the right side 3 feet away from the wall. He was panting, leaning against the shelf, his arms shaking. He shone the flashlight into the gap, and his blood ran cold. The wall behind the bookshelf was different from the rest of the room. The plaster was smoother, newer, a different shade of gray. And centered perfectly in the space the shelf had occupied was the faint, unmistakable outline of a doorway. It had been meticulously plastered over, sanded and blended, designed by a patient, obsessive hand to vanish completely. Tank shoved his body into the gap Spencer had created. The dog jammed his nose against the very bottom of the wall, where the plaster met the floor. A tiny hairline crack had formed in the old sealant. Tank sniffed once, twice, a powerful, forceful inhalation. Then he let out a sharp, definitive huff and sat, looking up at Spencer, his duty done. Spencer knelt beside his dog, the roar of the storm forgotten, his heart hammering in his chest. He put his own face near the crack. It was faint, buried under decades of mold and sea air. But it was there, the sickly sweet, musty, and utterly distinct smell of organic decomposition. Spencer stared at the plastered-over door, his mind racing. Rats didn't need doorways. Raccoons didn't know how to use plaster. Tyler Whitman had been right. Thomas Crane had been protecting something. Spencer raised the heavy end of the crowbar and rested it against the center of the hidden door. He had to know. Spencer did not hesitate. He reversed the crowbar, gripping the heavy flat end, and slammed it against the plaster outline of the hidden door. The sound was a dull, heavy thump, not the hollow crack he expected. The plaster was thick, reinforced. His uncle had not intended this to be found. The storm howled behind him, a furious living thing, but in front of him was a solid, man-made barrier. Tank, sensing the shift in Spencer's energy from discovery to demolition, backed up a few paces and stood guard, his gray and white body tense, his gaze locked on the wall. Spencer struck again. A spiderweb of cracks appeared. He hit it a third time, and a chunk of plaster the size of his hand fell away, revealing the dark, woody slats of the lath behind it. "This isn't enough," Spencer grunted, his breath fogging. He needed more force. He needed a hammer. "Watch him," he ordered Tank, pointing at the hole, though he meant the entire groaning hotel. The dog sat, his ears pivoting, a perfect sentinel. Spencer ran from the library, his boots pounding on the stairs, the flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. He burst into the small manager's office. Sabrina was fast asleep on the cot, her small face peaceful, oblivious to the storm and the madness her uncle was currently engaged in. He grabbed his old toolbox, pulling out a small 3-pound sledgehammer. He paused for a fraction of a second, his gaze lingering on Sabrina. This was for her. Whatever this was, it was for her. He ran back, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He returned to the library to find Tank exactly as he had left him, a statue of disciplined patience. "Okay," Spencer said, planting his feet. "Stand back, boy." He swung the hammer. The impact was immediate. A loud, splintering crash echoed through the library as the hammer punched clean through the lath. Spencer reversed the crowbar and jammed it into the hole, pulling a large section of the wall free. For the next hour, he worked in a rhythmic, desperate frenzy. Swing the hammer, a heavy crash. Pry with the crowbar, a screech of tortured wood. His plaid shirt, a pattern of red, navy, and light gray, was dark with sweat, sticking to the gray t-shirt beneath it. Plaster dust filled his lungs, caking his beard and hair. The work was brutal, but it was grounding. The physical exertion was a release. Every blow was a strike against his helplessness, against the empty fuel tank, against the nightmares that hunted him. Tank paced anxiously, his claws making a clicking sound on the floor. He whined, not in alert, but in nervous energy, sensing his master's exertion and the violent destruction of the wall. Finally, with a splitting groan, a section of the wall wide enough for a man to fit through collapsed inward. Spencer, breathing heavily, leaned on the hammer, shining his flashlight into the black void he had created. He had expected to see the hotel's outer wall, or perhaps a simple closet. He saw neither. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness and hit another wall, about 5 feet deeper in. But this wall was different. It was black, smooth, and seemed to gleam wetly. His heart hammered. He squeezed through the jagged hole, crowbar in hand. Tank pushed in right behind him, snorting at the new smells. Spencer stood in a narrow, man-made corridor. He had broken through the library's plaster wall, only to find himself in a gap. To his right and left were the hotel's structural beams. In front of him was the real barrier. It was a cube, a solid, independent structure built inside the hotel, with its own walls and its own ceiling, separate from the rotting roof above. The black walls were not wet. They were coated in a thick, industrial-grade waterproofing sealant, the kind used for basements or ship hulls. Thomas Crane had built a vault. This was the room within a room. It was an act of profound paranoia and brilliant foresight. The storm could tear the hotel to pieces, the roof could collapse entirely, but this inner sanctum, this fortified box, would remain. It was utterly, perfectly dry. The smell of decomposition that Tank had tracked was gone, its source buried in the plaster and lath debris of the outer wall, the mummified remains of some unfortunate animal, just as he'd thought. But that animal, in its death, had served as a signpost. Tank, his original mission complete, was now sniffing with deep curiosity at the base of the black-sealed wall. Spencer followed the beam of his light along the vault wall until it landed on a heavy, steel-plated door. It was secured not with a modern lock, but with a massive, old-fashioned sliding bolt and a heavy-duty padlock. The lock, however, was not fastened. It hung open on the hasp. Spencer's hand trembled slightly. He reached out and slid the heavy, unoiled bolt. The sound was a loud, metallic shriek that was swallowed by the roar of the wind outside. He pulled the heavy door open. The air that escaped was not the damp, moldy air of the hotel. It was cool, dry, and still, carrying the scent of canvas, old wood, and something metallic, like a new penny. He stepped inside. Tank followed, his sniffing now the only sound in the sudden, tomb-like silence. The storm felt a world away. Spencer's flashlight beam swept across the room. It was filled with wooden chests, dozens of them. They were not trunks. They were heavy seafaring chests made of dark oak, bound with brass fittings that had turned a dull greenish-brown with age. They were stacked neatly, 3 high, in organized rows. He approached the nearest stack. He placed the flashlight on top of one chest, pointing the beam at the ceiling, filling the small room with a dim, reflected light. He gripped the lid of the top chest. It was heavy. He lifted it, the hinges groaning in protest. He stared. His mind, conditioned for the harsh realities of war and poverty, could not immediately process what he was seeing. The chest was filled, neatly, with small rectangular bars of a dull, heavy yellow metal. Gold. He reached in and picked one up. It was heavier than it looked, fitting perfectly in his palm. It was stamped with a small, intricate crest he didn't recognize. He just stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. He moved to the next chest and opened it. A cascade of coins. They spilled over the edge, making a soft, metallic clink. They were dark, tarnished, but unmistakably old. Spanish doubloons, pieces of 8, coins he had only seen in movies. He staggered back, his hand finding Tank's head, grounding him. The dog licked his fingers, tasting the dust and sweat. He opened a third chest. This one was different. It was lined with faded velvet. Inside, nestled in compartments, were tools. A brass sextant, an oxidized compass in a gimbaled wooden box, a set of rolled-up charts, yellowed and brittle, ancient maritime artifacts. Spencer sank to his knees, the single gold bar still heavy in his hand. The weight of it was terrifying. This was his uncle's legacy. This was Thomas's curse. It was not the paranoid raving of a madman. It was a secret worth a fortune, a secret that, resting in a dry, silent tomb, had just become his. The silence in the vault was absolute. Outside, the storm raged, a symphony of crashing waves and splintering wood, but here, inside Thomas Crane's sealed sanctum, there was nothing. The air was still, heavy with the metallic tang of gold and the dry, papery scent of ages. Spencer Crane was on his knees. The single gold bar was a cold, heavy weight in his hand. His mind, trained for conflict, for clear threats and immediate action, was short-circuiting. This was a different kind of battlefield, one with no rules of engagement. Tank, his partner, his shadow, nudged his hand. The dog's wet nose was a sudden, grounding shock of reality. Spencer looked at the dog. Tank was not looking at the gold. He was sniffing the leg of a small, simple wooden desk tucked into the far corner of the room, almost hidden in the shadows. A desk. Spencer slowly, mechanically, got to his feet. His knees ached. He was covered in sweat, plaster dust, and the grime of the library. He picked up the flashlight from the chest he had placed it on, his movements stiff. He swept the beam of light away from the glittering stacks of treasure and toward the desk. It was an object of stark simplicity compared to the Baroque fortune it shared a room with. It was a small, unadorned wooden table with a single matching chair, the kind one might find in a monk's cell. And on its surface, placed with perfect precision, were 2 books. One was a massive leather-bound ledger, its spine thick and imposing. The other was smaller, a journal of dark, worn leather, its cover held shut by a simple strap. Spencer walked toward it, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. He set the gold bar down on the desk, the sound a solid, heavy thud that seemed too loud for the room. Tank sat at his feet, his body pressing lightly against Spencer's leg, a silent, comforting presence. Spencer opened the large ledger first. His breath caught. The pages were filled, edge to edge, with a cramped, obsessively neat script. It was not a diary, it was a catalog. Item de Rosa 1, gold bar, Spanish crest, 1.2. Item de Rosa 2, gold bar, Spanish crest, 1.2. He flipped a page. Item 147, doubloon, Philip V, 1714. Item 148, doubloon, Philip V, 1714. He flipped again, deeper into the book. Item for 320, sextant, brass, T. Cook and Sons. Heavy oxidization. Item bar 321, navigation chart, vellum, coast of New Spain. Water damage in upper quadrant. This was the inventory of a life's work, a work of madness and precision. He closed the ledger, his fingers trembling. He then reached for the smaller, more personal book. He unhooked the leather strap. He opened the cover. On the first page, in the same meticulous handwriting, was a name and a date. Thomas Crane. October 1973. Spencer pulled the hard wooden chair back, the sound a dry scrape. He sat down. The storm, the hotel, the world, all of it faded away. There was only the flashlight beam, the book, and the quiet breathing of his dog. He began to read. October 14th, 1973. It is real? I have told them for 20 years. The fools at the university, the idiots at the State Historical Society. I told them the Osprey Queen was not a legend. I told them the charts were misinterpreted. They laughed at me. They called me a crank. They will not laugh anymore. Spencer's eyes scanned the page, his heart pounding. The quake was a sign. The earth itself tore the cliff open to prove me right. The sea cave below the point. I only went to check the cliff stability. I did not expect. Thomas described the earthquake that had rocked the Oregon coast in 1973. He wrote of a new cave, a fissure created by the collapsed cliff face, accessible only at the lowest tide. October 17, 1973. I went inside. I almost did not come back, but I saw it. The wreckage, not the main hull, but the captain's quarters, the hold, smashed into the back of the cave by a force 180 years old, and the chests. The journal was filled with a frantic, ecstatic energy. Thomas, the town recluse, the quiet, eccentric historian, had found it. The lost treasure of the Osprey Queen, a legendary Spanish galleon that had vanished in a storm in 1792, taking its vast payload of New World gold and artifacts with it. Spencer turned the page. The tone of the entries began to change. November 2, 1973. I brought the first bar back. It is heresy. It is beautiful. I cannot report this. I will not. What will they do? The bureaucrats? The government? They will take it, melt the gold, and call it state assets. They will take the artifacts and put them in a sterile concrete basement in Portland, labeled and forgotten. They will conserve the history until it has no soul. They will ruin it. They will not have it. A cold dread settled in Spencer's stomach. This was not a discovery. This was a confession. January 11th, 1974. The work is slow, one piece at a time, in the dark. The tide gives me 2 hours, twice a day. The sea cave is a death trap, but I am moving it. I am saving it. Spencer flipped through the journal, watching decades fly by in the cramped script. The entries documented the 40-year obsession, the secret journeys to the cave, the slow, painstaking work of hauling hundreds of pounds of gold and artifacts up the cliff face, alone. He read about the construction of the vault itself, disguised as a structural repair to the hotel's foundation. The materials bought 1 bag of concrete, 1 sheet of sealant at a time, from a dozen different towns. He read as the historian's joy curdled into a dragon's paranoia. May 22, 1995. A fishing boat came too close to the cave. They saw my ropes. I cut them. I had to. It is mine to protect. The fools are everywhere. They are watching. March 8, 2007. That boy from the town. He climbed the fence. He was just a boy, but he could have been one of them. I ran him off. He will not come back. None of them will. The curse of Thomas Crane. Let them call me that. Let them be afraid. It is the only way to keep her safe. The Queen. Thomas had not been hiding the treasure in the hotel. In his mind, the hotel was the treasure, a fortress built to protect history from the world. Spencer closed the book. The last entry was from 6 months ago, the handwriting shaky. It is done. It is safe. But the walls are thin, and I am so very tired. Spencer sat in the silence, the weight of his uncle's 40-year secret settling on his shoulders. He finally understood the curse, the traps, the aggressive behavior Tyler Whitman had warned him about. It was the desperate, lonely defense of a man who believed he was the last guardian of a lost world. He looked at the gold bar he had placed on the desk. It was no longer just a solution to his problems. It was a life's work, a burden, a terrible, glittering secret. Tank, who had been resting his head on Spencer's knee, suddenly stood up and licked his face. The simple, uncomplicated gesture cut through the heavy historical fog. Spencer was jolted back to the present. The storm, the hotel, Sabrina. He was not in a tomb, he was in a vault, and he had to get back to his niece. He pocketed the small journal, his hand closing over its worn leather cover. Spencer emerged from the vault, closing the heavy steel door behind him. The sound of the bolt sliding home was a metallic, definitive shriek in the storm-filled library. He leaned his back against the cold, sealed wall, the small, leather-bound journal heavy in his pocket. His mind was a whirlwind. He had returned to the library to find the storm worse, the wind and rain driving through a newly broken window on the far side of the room. He had just confirmed his uncle was a thief, a madman, a brilliant historian, and a guardian, all at once. He had to get back to Sabrina. But he found he could not move. His gaze was fixed on the jagged hole he had made in the plaster wall, the entryway to a secret that defied comprehension. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, the flashlight aimed at the wreckage, his crowbar resting beside him. Tank, ever present, sat pressed against his side, the dog's warmth a sharp contrast to the cold dread filling Spencer's veins. He was overwhelmed. The gold? He tried to calculate it. He was not an expert, but he had seen movies. He had common sense. There were dozens of chests. He had seen at least 100 bars in the first one he opened. And the coins, and the artifacts. It was not thousands of dollars. It was millions, tens of millions, maybe, just maybe, hundreds of millions. It was enough. The thought hit him not as a comfort, but as a physical blow. The air was punched from his lungs. It was enough. Enough to take Sabrina and leave this rotting, cursed place. Enough to go somewhere warm, somewhere the damp didn't creep into his bones. Arizona, a small house with a yard, a new truck. He could give her everything, a college fund, a trust, a life where she would never ever have to eat powdered milk mixed with cold water or wear shoes with holes in them. He would never have to see that look of resigned patience on a 4-year-old's face again. His breathing quickened. The walls of the library seemed to press in. The rhythmic thump of a loose shutter somewhere in the hotel matched the pounding in his head. The ringing in his ears, his old companion, grew from a hum to a piercing whine. His PTSD, which he had held at bay through sheer desperate momentum, flared violently. This was a trap. This was an ambush. It was a moral IED, buried in a wall, waiting for a desperate man to step on it. He scrambled to his feet and lurched back through the hole, into the vault. Tank followed, whining, sensing the sudden, sharp shift in his handler. Spencer stood in the silent, dry tomb, his chest heaving. The gold gleamed, indifferent. It wasn't a trap. It was a solution. It was a way out. "What has honor ever given you?" The voice was his own, but it felt alien, a desperate, rasping whisper in his head. "What did you get for doing the right thing, for serving, for following orders?" He saw flashes. The dust of the convoy. The unbearable, white-hot flash. The screaming. "Nightmares," he whispered aloud, his voice hoarse. "It gave me nightmares and a truck that's out of gas?" He walked back to the first chest he had opened. He reached in and picked up the same gold bar. It was heavy, solid, real. This was not a memory. This was not a phantom limb. This was real. "Just one," the voice in his head argued, seductive and logical. "Just one bar. 10 pounds. Who would miss one? Thomas was a thief anyway. He stole this from the sea. You're just reallocating it. He could slip it into his jacket. He could take it to Portland. He could sell it. 1 bar. It would be enough for a small house, somewhere warm. Enough for Sabrina to have new shoes, hot food." He looked at the open door of the vault. He looked at Tank. The dog was watching him, his head tilted, his expression not of judgment, but of deep canine concern. "What's the matter, boy?" Spencer's voice cracked. "It's just gold." He clutched the bar to his chest. He turned, his body rigid. He was a soldier. He knew how to secure an asset. He would take 1 bar for Sabrina. He would take it now. He reached for the inner pocket of his old brown leather jacket. He was a good man in a bad situation. He deserved this. Sabrina deserved this. He was just about to slip the heavy bar into his pocket when a small sound made him freeze. It was a scrape, a footstep in the library. His blood turned to ice. Harding? Had he been followed? He shoved Tank behind him and moved to the doorway of the vault, his hand grabbing the crowbar, his heart hammering with a different kind of adrenaline. A small figure appeared in the jagged, plaster-and-lath hole. It was a splash of impossible color in the gloom, a bright red dress, covered in plaster dust. "Sabrina!" His voice was a harsh, terrified bark. "I told you to stay in the office. Get back!" She just stood there, her small hand resting on the broken edge of the wall, her expression serious. Tank pushed past Spencer's legs, running to her, nudging her hand and whining. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but clear, "I got scared." "I know, Sweet Pea, I know, but you can't be in here. It's not safe." He was frantic, trying to hide the gold bar he was still holding behind his leg. He felt like a criminal. She looked past him, into the vault. She didn't seem to notice the gold. Her eyes were fixed on the dark, empty chair at the desk. "Daddy, I talked to Uncle Thomas." Spencer froze. "What? Honey, no. Uncle Thomas. He's gone. He's not here." "He is," she insisted, with the simple, unshakable certainty of a 4-year-old. "He was in the office, but it's too loud. He's sad." Spencer stared at her. The imaginary friend? The bearded uncle. It had been Thomas all along. "Sabrina," he started, his voice failing. "He said he's tired," she whispered, stepping toward him. "He said he's tired of keeping secrets." The words, the simple, innocent, impossible words. They struck Spencer's conscience with the force of a physical blow. He looked from his niece's trusting face to the dog. Tank had returned to his side and was looking up at him, his gaze silent, loyal, and absolute. It was the same look Tank gave him every morning before a patrol, a look of pure, uncomplicated duty, a look that said, "I am here, I am ready. What is the mission?" Spencer looked down at the gold bar in his hand. It was no longer a solution. It was a poison. It was his uncle's 40-year burden, and he had, for one terrible moment, been willing to pass it on to his niece. Suddenly, the gold felt burning hot. He let out a choked sound, half sob, half groan, and dropped the bar. It hit the concrete floor with a loud, heavy clank that echoed in the silent vault. He stumbled forward, out of the tomb, and fell to his knees in the dust of the library. He pulled Sabrina to him, burying his face in her hair, his arms wrapped around her small, warm body, his entire frame shaking. Tank pushed his head under Spencer's arm, whining, licking the tears and plaster dust from his master's face. "I'm sorry," Spencer whispered, though he wasn't sure to whom. To Sabrina, to Tank, to the ghost of his uncle. He could not build their future on a stolen secret. He could not protect her by becoming the very thing he had fought against. He was a soldier, and he had a new mission. 2 days passed. The great storm had blown itself out, leaving the Oregon coast in a state of bruised, sun-drenched silence. The air was cold, but the sky was a sharp, piercing blue. Spencer Crane was working. He had spent the first 24 hours after the discovery in a state of exhausted, hyper-vigilant clarity. He had resecured the vault, sliding the heavy steel door shut and bolting it. He had then manhandled the massive, waterlogged oak bookshelf back in front of the jagged hole in the plaster, creating a barrier that, while not impenetrable, would deter a casual inspection. The vault was sealed again, but now he was acutely, terribly aware of it. It was a humming, radioactive presence in the hotel. He had taken the small, leather-bound journal and hidden it at the bottom of his old army rucksack, buried beneath his spare set of clothes. He, Sabrina, and Tank were nearly out of food. The storm had finished the last of their bread and peanut butter. His task now was simple, desperate, and physical. He had to make the manager's office weatherproof, and he had to get supplies. He'd driven into Oak Haven Point, the old truck's engine coughing, and spent the last of his cash at Tyler Whitman's store. He bought 2 large sheets of plywood, a box of nails, a small container of gasoline, and, most importantly, milk, bread, and a large bag of the cheapest dog food. Tyler Whitman had watched him with the same impassive, weary eyes, but had added a small bag of apples to the order without charge, muttering something about windfall. The news, it seemed, had spread. The veteran with the kid and the dog wasn't just passing through. He was trying to fix the unfixable. Spencer was on a rickety ladder, nailing plywood over a broken window in the main lobby, when the car arrived. His back was to the driveway, but he heard it. It was not the rumble of an old pickup. It was the quiet, confident crunching of expensive tires on gravel. Tank, who had been lying in a patch of sun by the open office door, was instantly on his feet. He didn't bark, but a low, almost inaudible woof rumbled in his chest. "Easy, boy," Spencer said quietly, climbing down the ladder. A dark blue Lincoln sedan, gleaming and out of place, parked next to his rust-pocked truck. A man emerged. He was in his late 50s, soft in the middle, wearing a dark wool overcoat that probably cost more than Spencer's truck. His shoes were polished, and his silver hair was perfectly combed. He moved with an air of unearned authority. Spencer stepped forward, hammer in hand, his old brown leather jacket unzipped over his red, navy, and gray plaid shirt. He instinctively wiped his dusty hands on his faded jeans. "Mr. Crane?" the man asked. His voice was smooth, practiced. "That's me." Arthur Harding, Oakhaven Bank. He extended a soft, clean hand. Spencer reluctantly shook it. Harding's grip was weak, but his eyes were sharp. "I was your uncle's executor," Harding continued, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated facade of the hotel. He made a small sound of disapproval. "A sad state of affairs. I was the one who contacted you regarding the inheritance. I must admit, I'm surprised to see you here. Most would have. Well, let the state handle it." "It's family," Spencer said simply. "Family property." Harding gave a short, polite laugh. "Of course, noble. But Mr. Crane, as the executor, it is my duty to advise you. This property is a liability. The back taxes alone are considerable. My bank, unfortunately, holds the lien." Spencer's stomach tightened. He had known this was coming. "I'm here to help, son," Harding said, his tone shifting to one of false empathy. "I'm here to help you manage this burden. We can arrange a quick sale, satisfy the lien, and perhaps put a few dollars in your pocket. Better than nothing, surely." "I'm just assessing the situation, Mr. Harding." "Assessing?" Harding looked around again. "There is nothing to assess. It's a teardown. Now, as I still have probate authority until the estate is settled, I'll need to conduct a final inspection. Just a formality, you understand, to close the books." Spencer's senses went on high alert. This man was too smooth, too eager. Harding had, in fact, been suspicious of Thomas Crane for years. As the banker, he had seen the account. He saw the small, baffling expenses. A man letting a hotel rot does not buy dozens of bags of concrete, industrial sealant, and heavy steel bolts year after year. Harding smelled hidden assets. He had been waiting for the old man to die just so he could tear the place apart. "I'll just take a look around," Harding said, moving past Spencer toward the main doors. The library, I recall, was where he spent most of his time. The library. Spencer's heart hammered. He moved casually but deliberately to block the hallway entrance. "I wouldn't, Mr. Harding. The storm did a lot of damage. The upper floors aren't safe. The structure's compromised." Harding stopped, his smile tightening. "Nonsense. I'm perfectly capable of watching my step. Now, if you'll excuse me." He tried to step around Spencer. He never saw the dog. Tank had moved with the silent, fluid grace of a predator. One moment he was by the office door, the next he was standing directly in Harding's path, blocking the hallway. He did not bark. He did not snap. He just stood, a 90-pound statue of gray and white muscle, his head low. Harding stopped dead. "Goodness, Mr. Crane, call your dog off." "He's not doing anything," Spencer said, his voice level. "He just doesn't like people rushing." Harding, arrogant and accustomed to getting his way, took one more aggressive step forward. The sound that came from Tank was terrifying. It was not a bark, it was a low, deep rumble that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. It was the sound of a large engine idling. Tank's upper lip curled back just an inch, exposing the long, white canine tooth on the left side. He did not move. He did not blink. He just was. Harding, who had built his life on intimidation, was a coward at heart. He looked into the dog's cold, intelligent eyes and saw a wolf. He stumbled back a step, his polished shoe slipping on the dusty floor. The friendly facade vanished, replaced by a flush of mottled crimson anger. "This is unacceptable," he hissed, his voice suddenly shrill. "That animal is dangerous. I am the executor of this estate. You are interfering. You will be hearing from my attorney, Mr. Crane. You will be removed." He turned, smoothing his overcoat, and stormed back to his Lincoln. He fumbled with the door handle, threw one last hateful look at Spencer and the silent dog, and sped away, his tires spinning and throwing gravel. Spencer let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His hands were shaking. Tank looked up at him, the growl gone, and gave a small, quiet thump of his tail against the wall. "Good boy," Spencer whispered, dropping his hand to the dog's head. "Good boy." Sabrina peeked out from the office, her red dress a bright spot in the shadows. "Bad man, Daddy?" Spencer managed a thin smile. "Just a man in a hurry, sweet pea." The confrontation left him rattled. Harding was a new threat, a predator who smelled weakness. Later that day, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, another vehicle approached. Spencer tensed, but it was the familiar coughing rumble of Tyler Whitman's faded green pickup. Spencer stepped onto the porch, wary. Tank stood beside him, but his posture was relaxed. Whitman, a man of few words, got out. He was holding a cardboard box. He walked right up to Spencer, avoiding eye contact, and shoved the box at him. "Figured," he grunted. "Storm probably tore up your supplies." Spencer, confused, took the box. It was warm. He looked inside. There was a large thermos, a carton of milk, and a small 5-pound bag of dog food. Spencer was speechless. "Mr. Whitman, I don't know what to say. I can't pay for this right now." Whitman finally looked at him, his gaze surprisingly direct. He nodded once, gruffly. "Nobody deserves to be hungry while they're trying to fix a roof," he muttered. "That's all." He turned, got back in his truck, and drove away, leaving Spencer standing on the porch, holding the first real act of kindness he had received since arriving. He went inside and opened the thermos. The smell of hot, rich beef soup filled the small office. He poured a cup for himself and one for Sabrina, and then poured the dog food into Tank's bowl. He had faced a predator and, just hours later, been helped by the very community he expected to reject him. The contrast was stark. He looked at the sealed hallway, the path to the library. His mission was clearer than ever. That evening, the manager's office was quiet, save for the sound of Sabrina slurping soup. The cardboard box from Tyler Whitman sat on the desk. The beef soup, still steaming, was the first truly hot meal they had eaten in days. Spencer sat on an overturned crate, watching his niece eat, a profound stillness settling over him. He had faced 2 visitors that day, and they had become the 2 poles of his world. First, there was Harding, a predator in a wool coat, a man who used the law as a crowbar to pry open other people's lives. Spencer had seen men like Harding before, contractors in secure zones who smiled while they stole supplies meant for local schools. Harding was a threat. He was suspicious, angry, and he had resources. He would be back, and he wouldn't be alone. He would come with lawyers, with court orders, with the full crushing weight of a system Spencer could not fight. The confrontation had made the treasure feel radioactive, a secret that would, eventually, kill the person holding it. Then there was Tyler Whitman. Spencer looked at the carton of milk on the desk. He looked at the bag of dog food, which Tank was eating with a quiet, steady rhythm. He looked at the soup. Nobody deserves to be hungry while they're trying to fix a roof. It was such a simple statement, gruff, impersonal, almost dismissive. But to Spencer, it was everything. It was not charity. It was recognition. Whitman hadn't seen a vagrant, a failure, a PTSD case. He had seen a man working. In that one simple act of kindness, Whitman had offered him something he hadn't realized he'd lost: a community, a sense of belonging to a place. Spencer had spent the last 2 years running, isolating himself, convinced he was a broken piece of machinery, too dangerous to be around normal people. He had come to Oak Haven Point only to hide, to find a final fortified wall to put his back against. But Harding's aggression and Whitman's kindness had crystallized his dilemma. He looked at the sealed hallway leading to the library, the vault. His temptation in that room, Chapter 6, had been about escape, taking the gold to run away, to build new walls somewhere else. But now he felt a different, unfamiliar urge. He wanted to stay. He wanted Sabrina to grow up in a place where neighbors brought you soup. He wanted to fix this roof. He wanted to earn the respect that Tyler Whitman had given him on credit. And if he was going to stay, he could not be a thief. He could not be Thomas Crane, hiding in the dark, hoarding a secret, poisoning the ground he lived on. He had to be part of this community, not steal from it. The soldier in him, the part of him that understood duty, finally took command. Harding was the immediate threat. The treasure was the root of the problem. His mission was to secure the asset and report it to the proper authority. His mind clicked into a familiar procedural calm. This was a chain of command issue. His uncle, in his paranoia, had been wrong. You didn't protect history by hiding it. You protected it by bringing it into the light. A museum? He considered it. But that felt wrong, too slow. Harding was moving now, and this wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a contested asset. Thomas's journal was a confession. This was a legal matter. The local police? Spencer dismissed the idea instantly. In a town this small, Harding probably played golf with the chief of police. He couldn't risk it. No, this was bigger. This was federal. This was, he realized, evidence. He pulled the small leather-bound journal from his rucksack. He needed to make a call. Later that night, long after Sabrina had fallen asleep in the sleeping bag, Spencer sat in the cab of his truck. He had driven 3 miles up the winding cliff road, the only place he'd found a single flickering bar of cell service. The night was cold. He wore his old brown leather jacket unzipped, the collar of his red and navy plaid shirt turned up against the wind. Tank sat in the passenger seat, a silent, watchful shadow. Spencer used his phone's browser. The screen's glow lit his face, accentuating the tired lines around his eyes. He typed, FBI Portland, Oregon art theft. A link appeared, Art Crime and Cultural Property Team. He clicked it. There was a direct number. His heart was pounding. This was it. The moment he dropped the gold bar, he took a deep, steadying breath and pressed the number. It rang 3 times. FBI Portland, how can I help you? The voice was a bored, neutral receptionist. Yes, Spencer stammered, feeling ridiculous. I need to speak to someone about cultural property. I think I found something. Something big. 1 moment, sir. I'll transfer you. A click, another ring, and then a new voice. Female, sharp, professional, and utterly exhausted. Special Agent Jensen, Art Crime. Agent Jensen, Spencer began, trying to sound credible. My name is Spencer Crane. I'm in Oak Haven Point, at the Old Mariner's Rest Hotel. Oak Haven Point, she repeated, the sound of a keyboard clicking in the background. That's a ways out. What can I do for you, Mr. Crane? You found an old painting in an attic? Her skepticism was a cold wave over the phone. He knew how this sounded. No, ma'am, he said, pushing forward. My uncle, Thomas Crane, he passed away. He left me this hotel. I found a hidden room, a vault. The clicking stopped. A vault? Go on. It's full, gold, artifacts, coins, from a shipwreck. A heavy sigh came through the receiver. Sir, Mr. Crane, I am very busy. We get calls about lost pirate treasure at least twice a month. It's almost always a hoax or a misunderstanding. If you found some old coins, I suggest you take them to a local appraiser. She was dismissing him. He was losing her. No, you don't understand, he said, his voice rising in desperation. He kept a journal, a logbook. He documented everything. He found it in a sea cave after the 1973 earthquake. Sir, a journal is not proof. It's the Osprey Queen, Spencer said, cutting her off. There was a sudden, absolute silence on the other end of the line. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the static of the weak signal. When she spoke again, her voice was completely different. It was sharp, focused, and humming with electric intensity. "Mr. Crane, say that name again." "The Osprey Queen," Spencer said, his grip tightening on the phone. "Sank in 1792. My uncle wrote it all down. He found the wreckage. He found the inventory. He spent 40 years moving it into the hotel. I'm looking at... I found sextants, navigation tools, and Spanish gold bars. He wrote about doubloons dated 1714. He could hear her typing fast and frantic. "Mr. Crane," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Where are you exactly?" "I'm on the hill above the hotel. I had to get a signal." "Go back to the hotel. Lock your door. Do not, under any circumstances, re-enter that vault. Do you understand me? Do not touch anything else." "There's a man here," Spencer said, the adrenaline making him sharp. "A banker, Arthur Harding. He's the executor. He was suspicious. He tried to get into the library today." "Harding?" she repeated, typing. "Got it. Mr. Crane, do not speak to anyone else. Not Harding, not the local police, not anyone. You are to sit tight and wait. I am coming myself. I'm leaving now. I'll be there by sunrise." The call ended. Spencer sat in the dark truck, the phone glowing in his hand. He looked at Tank. The dog whined softly, as if sensing the monumental shift. "Well, boy," Spencer whispered, his voice shaking, "I guess the secret's out." He started the truck, the engine turning over with a reluctant cough, and drove back down the hill. He was no longer a man hiding. He was a witness, guarding evidence. The mission had begun. Spencer did not sleep. After the call to Portland, he had returned to the manager's office, bolting the flimsy door. He sat in the one intact armchair, his old brown leather jacket pulled tight, the crowbar resting against the arm. Tank lay at his feet, not sleeping either, the dog's head raised, ears swiveling at every creak of the wind. Sabrina was the only one who slept, a small, still mound in the sleeping bag, her red dress hung over the back of a chair to dry. Spencer was a soldier on watch again. He was guarding a position, waiting for a relief force, and he knew the most dangerous moments came just before the dawn. The dawn arrived not with relief, but with headlights. At 5:14 a.m., the first set of lights swept across the office window. Spencer was on his feet instantly, the crowbar in his hand. Tank was at the door, a low, hesitant growl in his throat. "Easy," Spencer breathed. He peeked through a crack in the plywood. A dark, unmarked sedan was pulling up, followed by a large white van with the Oregon state seal on the side. A woman emerged from the sedan. She was in her 40s, wearing a dark pantsuit and a functional coat. She was exactly as her voice had sounded, sharp, professional, exhausted. "Mr. Crane," she called out, her voice cutting the cold morning air. "Special Agent Jensen, FBI. We spoke." Spencer opened the door, the hinges screaming. He stepped out onto the porch, flanked by Tank. He wore his faded red, navy, and white plaid shirt, the old leather jacket over it, and his steel-toed boots. He knew how he looked, a tall, gaunt man with a rugged, unshaven face, silver streaking the brown hair at his temples, looking more like a suspect than a witness. Agent Jensen's eyes took in Spencer, the dog, the crowbar, and the rotting hotel in one swift, assessing glance. "That's him," she said to the man who emerged from the van. This man was her opposite. He was in his late 60s, wearing a tweed jacket with elbow patches, his white hair windblown. He practically vibrated with an energy Spencer hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Crane," the man said, rushing forward and extending a hand. "Trevor Harmon, Oregon State Historical Society. You mentioned the Osprey Queen. You mentioned a journal. Is it the journal?" "Dr. Harmon is our state historian, Mr. Crane," Jensen cut in, taking control. "He's here to consult. I am here to secure the scene. Can you show us the room?" Spencer nodded, his throat tight. He led them, Tank at his heel, through the lobby, up the stairs, and into the dark library, the air still thick with the smell of plaster dust and the faint, sealed-in odor that had started it all. "It's behind this," Spencer said, gesturing to the massive bookshelf. It took all three of them to move it. When Jensen and Harmon saw the bolted steel door, the official professional masks slipped. Harmon let out a sound, a high-pitched, "Oh my goodness." Spencer, at Jensen's direction, took the crowbar and broke the simple padlock he had put on the latch. He pulled the heavy door open. The dry, still air of the vault met them. Jensen unclipped her flashlight and shone the beam inside. It swept over the chests, the gold, the artifacts. Trevor Harmon began to cry. "I don't believe it," he whispered, his hand shaking as he stepped inside. I've written papers debunking this. I've called it a myth." He ran a trembling finger over the oxidized metal of a sextant. This is a 1792 Lefebvre model. This is impossible." Agent Jensen was all business. "Mr. Crane, thank you. This is now a federal scene. I need you and your family to return to your office. Do not speak to anyone. This is an active investigation." By 8 a.m., the hotel was a fortress. By 9 a.m., the media had arrived. It started with a single local news van, alerted by a police scanner. Then, seeing the official FBI vehicles, the van's reporter made a frantic call. By noon, the Mariner's Rest looked like a military siege. News vans with satellite dishes lined the coast road. Helicopters, a sound Spencer viscerally hated, thrummed overhead, their thwack, 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 a constant percussive assault that set his teeth on edge. Reporters with microphones shouted questions at the yellow caution tape Jensen had strung up. Oak Haven Point, a town of 900 people, was suddenly the center of an international media storm. Spencer, Sabrina, and Tank were trapped in the manager's office. Spencer sat on the floor, his back against the wall, trying to breathe through the familiar rising panic. The noise, the shouting, the feeling of being surrounded. It was the convoy. It was the ambush. "Daddy, it's loud," Sabrina whispered, crawling into his lap. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. "It's okay, sweet pea. It's just noise." Tank, sensing his master's distress, pushed his heavy body against Spencer's side, his head resting on Spencer's knee. The dog's solid, steady presence was an anchor. Spencer focused on the feeling of the dog's fur, the rhythm of his breathing. Then he saw a new, unwelcome arrival. Arthur Harding's dark blue Lincoln. The banker had parked down the road and was now walking with purpose toward a reporter from a Portland news station. Harding, unlike Spencer, looked prepared. He was wearing his expensive overcoat, his face a mask of false civic concern. Spencer couldn't hear the interview, but he didn't need to. He saw Harding gesture with sympathy toward the hotel, then tap his own temple, a cuckoo gesture, before shaking his head in sadness. An hour later, a young FBI agent brought them a box of donuts and a small, battery-powered television. "Agent Jensen thought you should see this," the agent said, his face impassive. He turned it on. Harding's face filled the screen. "A tragedy?" Harding was saying, his voice smooth. "The man is clearly unstable. A veteran, you know, deeply troubled. I was, as the executor of the estate, trying to help him, to get him the services he needed." The reporter leaned in. "So, Mr. Harding, you're saying he didn't report this?" "I'm saying," Harding said, lowering his voice, "that I arrived here just days ago to perform my duties and found him acting erratically. I have reason to believe he broke into that room and was attempting to liquidate the assets when I intervened. Thank goodness the authorities are here now to secure the estate." Spencer felt the blood drain from his face. Unstable, troubled, trying to steal it. Harding was using his PTSD, his poverty, his very identity, as a weapon. Before he could react, the feed cut to a live press conference. Agent Jensen was standing at the edge of the caution tape. "I cannot comment on an active investigation," Jensen said, her voice flat, "but I can confirm this. The FBI was contacted by Mr. Spencer Crane, the legal heir. He has been fully cooperative. His actions are the reason this historical find is secure." Another reporter shouted, "What about the treasure?" Jensen's face was stone. "This is not a treasure hunt. This is an archaeological site. For specifics on the find, I'm handing this over to Dr. Trevor Harmon." The camera panned to the historian. Harmon looked exhausted, ecstatic, and angry. "Treasure?" Harmon scoffed, his voice booming unexpectedly. "You're all focused on the gold. Yes, there is gold, but that is the least important thing in this room." He held up a long metal tube sealed in an evidence bag. "Do you know what this is? This is a tin charter case. Inside, we found a Spanish land grant, predating the Lewis and Clark expedition, and a ship's manifest. This manifest," he paused, his voice thick with emotion, "lists the personal effects of the founders of this very town, who were passengers on that ship. We believed they were lost with nothing. We were wrong." He pointed a shaking finger at the hotel. "For a century, we believed the Osprey Queen was a myth. What Spencer Crane found, what he saved, is not just gold. It is the most significant maritime archaeological find on the West Coast in 100 years. It is Oregon's history." The reporters were stunned into silence. "What about Mr. Crane?" one finally asked. "Harding says he's unstable." Dr. Harmon's face turned thunderous. "Mr. Harding is a banker. I am a historian. I've just read a 40-year journal detailing one man's obsession, paranoia, and guilt. And then I met Mr. Crane, a man who, despite having nothing, was strong enough to resist the temptation of a literal dragon's horde and make the call. He didn't see gold. He saw history. He saw duty. Unstable is not the word I would use. I would use integrity. I would use hero." Inside the office, Spencer Crane put his hand on Tank's head. He looked at Sabrina, who was now busy drawing a picture of the helicopters on a paper napkin. He was still cold. He was still broke. He was still a veteran with nightmares. But for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel unstable. He didn't feel broken. He just felt like a soldier who had, finally, completed his mission. It was 6 weeks before the world gave Spencer Crane breathing room. The media circus, having exhausted its narrative of the hero veteran and the lost pirate gold, had packed up its satellite trucks and moved on to the next bright, flashing story. The FBI presence had shrunk, replaced by quiet, methodical teams from the Oregon State Historical Society. The last of the gold bars, cataloged and heavy, had been transported to a secure state vault in Salem. The Mariners' Rest Hotel was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was no longer the silence of decay. It was the silence of an empty stage, waiting for the next act. Spencer, Sabrina, and Tank were temporarily housed in a small, clean motel room in Oak Haven Point, paid for by the state. The town, now firmly on his side, treated him with a respectful, curious distance. Even Tyler Whitman had given him a short, approving nod at the general store, which felt like a victory. The final meeting took place in a sterile gray conference room in Portland. Spencer sat at one side of a long, polished table. On the other sat Agent Jensen, Dr. Trevor Harmon, and a man in a sharp suit who introduced himself as legal counsel for the state of Oregon. "Mr. Crane," the lawyer began, his voice flat, "we have concluded the initial assessment. As I'm sure Dr. Harmon has explained, what your uncle found was not, by legal definition, maritime salvage." Spencer just nodded, his hands clasped in front of him. "Because Mr. Thomas Crane removed the artifacts from their original site, the sea cave, and transported them onto private land, and because they have been abandoned for more than 40 years, they fall under the Oregon State Heritage and Abandoned Property laws. The entire find, the gold, the artifacts, the manifest, is the sovereign property of the state of Oregon." There it was, the final legal word. Spencer felt an odd sense of relief. The weight was gone. "I understand," Spencer said, his voice quiet. "However," the lawyer continued, "the state recognizes the extraordinary circumstances. You reported the find. You secured the assets. You acted with integrity. Under Statute 98-05, you are entitled to a legal finder's fee for the non-historical assets." He slid a long white envelope across the table. Spencer looked at it. He looked at Jensen, who gave him a small, supportive nod. He opened it. Inside was a check made out to Spencer Crane for $50,000. It was not millions. It was not a life-changing fortune. It was not enough to buy a house in a warm climate or to never work again. But to a man who had arrived with $7 and an empty tank of gas, it was a profound, staggering sum. It was enough. It was a new set of tires. It was 6 months' rent. It was a full pantry. It was a new pair of boots. It was, Spencer realized, exactly what the summary had promised, enough to start over. "Thank you," Spencer said, his throat thick. He carefully folded the check and put it in the pocket of his plaid shirt. "That concludes our business, Mr. Crane," the lawyer said, closing his briefcase. "Not quite," Dr. Harmon interrupted, a twinkle in his eye. "If you have a moment, Spencer, there is one more person who is very eager to meet you." The door opened and a woman walked in. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, with intelligent, kind eyes behind stylish glasses. She wore a professional dark blue blazer and carried a leather portfolio. She moved with an air of quiet, confident energy. "Mr. Crane," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm. "My name is Valerie Brooks. I'm the director of the Oregon Heritage Foundation." Spencer, confused, shook her hand. "I've been in meetings with Dr. Harmon and Agent Jensen for the last 2 weeks," she said, sitting down. "I've read your uncle's journal. I've read the FBI's report, and I've read the transcripts of Mr. Harding's attempts to slander you." She smiled. "Mr. Crane, what you did was remarkable. We, as a foundation, are not in the business of rewarding people, but we are in the business of honoring history, and you, sir, have just become a permanent part of it." "I'm not sure I follow, ma'am," Spencer said. "The state," Valerie explained, gesturing to the lawyer, "has the treasure, but you, Mr. Crane, still have the treasure chest. The Mariners Rest Hotel is still your property. And, as Mr. Harding was so keen to point out, it is a significant liability. The back taxes are due, the structure is unsound. That $50,000 will be gone in a year, just trying to keep it from falling into the sea." Spencer's brief hope turned cold. She was right. "The foundation," she continued, "sees this as an unprecedented opportunity. We are prepared to make a proposal. We want to fund the complete, museum-quality restoration of the Mariners Rest Hotel." Spencer stared at her. "Restore the whole thing?" "The whole thing," she said, her eyes shining with vision. "We want to preserve the history, not just of the Osprey Queen, but of your uncle's story, and yours." She opened her portfolio. "We propose a partnership. The Oregon Heritage Foundation will assume all costs for the restoration. The main lobby and grounds will be restored to their original 1920s glory. The vault, Dr. Harmon," she nodded to the historian, "will be turned into a permanent state-of-the-art museum exhibit detailing the find." "And the upper floors," Valerie continued, her voice softening, "are the most important part. We read your service record, Mr. Crane. We understand your background. It is our proposal that the upper floors be converted into high-quality, subsidized housing. A safe harbor, we're calling it Crane's Landing, with priority given to veterans in transition and struggling families from the Oak Haven Point community." Spencer felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. He was speechless. "It's a wonderful plan, ma'am," he finally managed to say. "But what does that have to do with me?" "Well," Valerie said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, "we need a curator for the museum, and we need an on-site manager for the housing. We need someone who understands the story, someone who respects the property, someone who knows what it means to need a safe place to land. The job is yours, Mr. Crane, if you want it." It was not a handout. It was a mission. It was a purpose, handed to him in a conference room. He thought of his nightmares. He thought of the ambush. He thought of the long, lonely years of feeling broken. He looked at Dr. Harmon, who was beaming. He looked at Agent Jensen, who was, for the first time, smiling. "Yes," Spencer said. "Yes, I want it." 1 year later, the late autumn sun felt warm on the porch of the Mariners Rest Hotel. The building was magnificent, The restoration had been painstaking, historically accurate, and beautiful. The fresh cream-colored paint and deep-sea blue trim gleamed. The windows, once shattered and boarded, were now polished glass reflecting the Pacific. The lawn, once a field of weeds and saltwater-burned mud, was a neat, manicured green. Spencer Crane stood on that porch, leaning against a restored pillar. He wore his old brown leather jacket, unzipped over a red, navy, and white plaid shirt. His faded jeans were clean and his boots were new. He was watching Sabrina. She was 5 now, her hair longer, but she was still a flash of crimson as she ran across the grass, her red dress swirling. She was laughing, chasing a seagull, her voice clear and bright in the ocean air. At Spencer's feet, Tank lay sleeping. The old dog was grayer now, his muzzle almost entirely white. He was no longer gaunt, no longer vibrating with anxiety. He was just a dog, sleeping peacefully in a patch of sun on the porch of his own home. Spencer looked past the lawn, past the town, to the endless blue-green expanse of the sea. The nightmares had not vanished entirely. They still came sometimes, but they were different now. They were just memories, no longer traps. They no longer held power over him. A small family, a young couple with a baby, waved to him from a second-story window, a Navy corpsman who had just moved into one of the new apartments. Spencer waved back. He had a job. He had a purpose. He had a home. He had found, in the heart of his uncle's paranoid fortress, the one thing he thought he had lost forever. He had found peace. True strength is not measured by what we can take, but by what we choose to give back. Spencer, Tank, and Sabrina found that the greatest treasure wasn't the gold hidden in the walls, but the home they built together out of honesty, loyalty, and a renewed sense of purpose. If this story about finding peace after the storm touched your heart, we invite you to share it with others who might appreciate it. We would be honored if you joined our community by subscribing, and we'd love to read your own reflections in the comments below. Our next story is ready for you now. Just click the video that has appeared on your screen to continue the journey with us.